Welcome, Mariners. I'm Captain Scott Souders with Chicago Yacht Academy, and today I'm going to be discussing navigational aids, how to avoid shallow reefs, shoals, and effectively navigate through channels. This is a two-part series on navigational rules, so if you haven't seen the first, discussing all of the other boats that you need to avoid, feel free to check it out in the description below. But with no further ado, we're going to jump right on in. I've drawn here a very basic harbor system. If you haven't figured it out already, the water is represented by the color blue and green represents the land. To make things a little more interesting, I'm going to put some rocks on the left-hand side here and a little bit of reef on the right-hand side. They may be poking out a little bit, maybe just beneath the surface, but they're there to remind us of the things that we need to avoid. You may have heard the phrase red right returning. On my right hand side, I'm going to put some red triangles marking the right hand side of the channel. Now, in order to protect us from the reef, we're going to put in a red none. Coming back to our phrase red right returning, we're going to keep all of these red markers on our right hand side as we return from sea. We're also going to do our best to stay to the right hand side of the channel. But what about the left? We're going to use green markers in order to indicate the left-hand side of the channel. In this case, the day markers are green squares, while a floating marker protecting us from going into the rocks is going to be a green can. You may have noticed a problem already that some of these are very similar. Our two green squares and our two red triangles are essentially identical except for their placement. So we need a way to discuss them as different entities, different navigational aids. So we're going to name them. On the right-hand side, we're going to give these even number names. And on the left-hand side, we're going to give them odd number names. This could just as easily be all boys' names on the right-hand side and all girls' names on the left-hand side. However, we've identified it with numbers so that we can see it sequentially as well. These aren't mile markers, they're not depth sounders, they're just names. Accordingly, when we obey red right returning, we're going to state our right hand side of the channel, keeping the red markers on the right hand side as we return from sea. By doing so, we're going to do the opposite when we head out. Some people like to say green going out, leaving enough room for boats that are coming in as well, making sure that both sets of traffic can get through. If you're having trouble remembering these, look to the 7-Up can for wisdom. It's got a number 7 on it, which is an odd number. It's green in color. It is in fact a can, and if you're willing to give me a little bit of a break, it's kind of square in shape when you look at it in 2D. So everything that's left over for the right-hand side then is going to be evens, reds, none, and triangles. So in determining which is which, think of the 7-Up can. I've added in front of our channel what is known as a safe water mark. This safe water mark indicates that all water seaward of this mark is equal or greater depth than is shoreward inside the channel. Accordingly, this mark can really be left to either side. It can be left to the port hand side, as this vessel just did, or the starboard hand side. The real indicator is that as you are returning from sea, as soon as you see that safe water mark, you need to be looking for those 1 and 2, that green and red buoys as you work your way in. When leaving, leave it to either side and know that that is the end of the channel. To make things a little more complex here, I'm going to put Cool Kid Island here inside of our harbor. Every major boating location seems to have some sort of hangout point or cool spot to anchor up. In Chicago, that's the Playpen. But here on my chart, I've made that Cool Kid Island. And you'll notice that there's 2 ways to go around it. The left way looks a little more narrow. Maybe it's shallower too. So accordingly, I'm going to put a preferred channel marker in front of Cool Kid Island. This preferred channel marker is green and red banded and indicates which is the preferred channel. What it's saying is that the preferred channel is to the right because the top band is green. When looking for the preferred channel, we look to this top band and we're going to treat that buoy as we would any color from that same top band color. Again, in this case, it's green, so it will be left to the left or to the port, just as we did 1, 3, and 5 as we entered the channel. Now, maybe you're a jet ski or a rowboat. It's not saying that you can't treat this like a red marker. You can, right? As this rowboat comes in, what it's doing out at sea, I have no idea, but it can take the scenic route. It can go the long way around Cool Kid Island because it's got a shallower draft. There could be a lot of different reasons to have a preferred channel marker. What's most important is that you study your charts ahead of time, that you're anticipating that preferred channel marker long before you get there so that you can react appropriately to it. We're going to take a quick break from our harbor and we're going to look at the eastern seaboard of the United States. If you didn't recognize it at first, this is the US. We got Maine at the top and Florida down at the bottom. Running nearly the entire eastern seaboard is the Intracoastal Waterway. It's a series of barrier islands, canals, rivers, micro harbors, all connecting a protected seaway that runs the whole coast, even wraps around Florida and back up the Gulf side a little bit. Now, there's not always a distinct red, right, or more specifically, returning from sea. If you're traveling along the eastern seaboard, you're not coming from or going to the sea, so returning from sea can be a little bit tricky. Accordingly, we're going to use conventional direction, which is clockwise around the U.S. This means that in the ICW, or the Intercoastal Waterway, southerly is going to be returning from sea. Accordingly, you're going to see red markers on the shoreward side, right, these triangles, and you'll see the green markers on the seaward side. Note how it continues to wrap around clockwise as it works its way around Florida. The easy way for me to remember this is that triangles, they look like mountains, so they belong on the land. That leaves the squares left over. To throw a wrench in the system, I'm going to put a little harbor here in, well, pretty much all of North Carolina. This harbor now creates cross traffic. We've got the ICW going north-south, we've got this harbor going east-west. So what do we do? Well, let's head back to our previously drawn harbor, right? It might look a little something like this, right? As you travel south down the ICW, you're going to be keeping those red markers on your right-hand side. Now, this mariner here has a choice to make. Well, frankly, they've got a problem in front of them, right? Most of these markers look consistent and the same, right? Like 3 and 6 are a non-issue. They match up with what we see in like 12, 14, 13, and 15. But take a closer look, right? Markers 4 and 5 are out of place, if you will, for the ICW. They're in line with the harbor, rather. If our mariner were to treat number 4 like they did any other red triangle, it would for sure spell disaster and put them right into the land. If they were to treat number 5 just like they had 15 and 13, well, then they're going to end up in the harbor. And that may not be the goal. The goal is to stay in the ICW and continue heading south. Accordingly, we're going to get a third color in our system. We're going to introduce these yellow markers to identify the ICW itself. You'll notice most of these match up consistently, right? Looking at 12 and 14, those are red triangles with yellow triangles on top. 13 and 15, green squares with yellow squares on top of them. But take a look at number 4. Number 4 is a red triangle with a yellow square on top of it. What this is saying is, hey, if you're looking to go into the harbor, sure, treat this like you would any other red right returning marker. But if you're trying to stay in the ICW, don't treat this like you would a red triangle. No, treat this the same way you would a green square. We see the opposite is true for marker number 5. On marker number 5, we have a yellow triangle. This is telling us that if we're trying to stay in the ICW, don't treat marker number 5 like you would a green square. Rather, treat it like you have the other red triangles. In doing so, our mariner finally has success and makes their way down, cross the channel, making sure that there is no cross traffic and safely through the ICW. Markers don't look like this on charts. They're not quite as animated. What you're actually going to see as I pull down 1 and 2 is markers that look like this. You're just going to get a dot. This dot shows the literal latitude and longitude of where that marker is. We're going to get a little bit more information with it as well. For our green can named number 1, we're just going to see GC and then in quotes its name, right? Number 1. The same will be true for our red none. RN, and in quotes we've got number 2, its name, right? Red none. If it's a lip buoy, it might show up highlighted like our green can is now. But we're also going to get a little more information about it. In quotes we see that we've got number 1, again its name, but now we see FLG3S. This means that its signaling pattern through that light at night is flashing green every 3 seconds. So as you approach this harbor at night, you're going to see green flash, darkness for 1, 2, 3 seconds. Green flash, darkness for 1, 2, 3 seconds. The same is true for our red none if we light it up. However, instead of being highlighted, it might show up as this kind of funky exclamation point guy. Again, we see that it is still named number 2, so that when we come up close on it, right, we can see which marker we're next to, but we get a flash pattern for this as well. This is flashing red every 2 seconds. And if there are other lit markers, if we were to light 3, 4, 5, and 6 entering the harbors, these would all have unique flash patterns. We won't see a green flash pattern of 3 seconds again. We won't see a red flash pattern of 2 seconds again. They won't necessarily stay odd and even on either side, but they will stay unique so that you can navigate to a unique marker at night. Let's jump over to a real chart from this. It's the Navionics web app. It's a great free resource available to mariners and a really good resource when you're boating in a new area. Here I've got my home boating area, Chicago. If you're not familiar, this is Navy Pier here. The Chicago locks are represented down here, and we're going to take a look at some of the basic navigational aids that we've just discussed. One of the more fun ones I want to show you is out here as we enter into what is known as the Greater Chicago Harbor. As you return from sea, you can see that there's a red marker on the right-hand side and a green marker on the left-hand side. As with most electronic chart plotters, Navionics works the same, where I can hover my cursor over a navigational aid, click on it, and in this case, I'm going to ask the question. I get a whole bunch of things that I can ask questions about. Am I asking about the soundings of 12 feet? Soundings of 17 feet? No, I'm not worried about the depth contour, the shoreline, or the submerged cable. I want to know more about the Chicago Harbor Light navigational aid. So I click on it. If this were a paper chart, I would see what's in parentheses at the very top left. FLR 5S 13M horn. What does that mean exactly? Fortunately for our digital charts, we don't have to be able to interpret that because it's spelled out for us already. Red flashing light with a period of 5 seconds and a range of 13 miles. That means you can see this thing 13 miles out to sea. That's wicked far. And has a horn for a fog signal. On our chart here, right, as I go back, you may notice that it's not very special. In fact, it's really no different than this red navigational aid or this red navigational aid at the top. So while it may seem underwhelming on the paper chart or on our electronic chart here, what you're going to see in person is actually this. This is the Chicago Harbor Light. Maybe you knew where this was going if you're a local already. But what we see on paper needs to match what we see on the water. So we're going to be looking for that flash pattern. In this case, it's not named or numbered, right? So we're going to be using our digital charts to help identify us when we're near it, coming up on it. And frankly, there's not really too many other red navigational aids nearby. The others are actually quite far apart, despite how close they may look on the chart. Let's take a look at another one. This is a sea guide wall light. Well, what does that even mean? Right? So I'm going to click on it and ask the question.
Here we are, our sea guide wall light, right? We're not interested in the shore contour or the boundaries of Cook County or the state of Illinois. No, we're gonna click on the sea guide wall light, right? This is a white isolated light with a period of 6 seconds in a range of 9 miles. What this is kind of like a little bit of a pseudo preferred channel marker. In reality, it actually looks a little something like this. You'll notice that it's white on top because there's no real preferred channel. Right? If we look back at our chart, there's no unsafe way. We can leave this to our starboard side or our port side. That second color, it's a green band, right? Saying that green is a real option. If we treat this like a green marker and we leave it to our left-hand side as we return from sea, well, then we're going to end up here in the Chicago locks. So there's no real preferred channel, but if you do treat it like that green, more than likely you're going to end up where you wanted to be, which was in the Chicago locks. And sure enough, you're going to end up cruising down the Chicago River in no time.
I hope this tutorial has been helpful. This really is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to navigational aids. There are so many different other markers and buoys out there, and they're worth learning about and researching. Most of all, I hope you've been encouraged to go and research well. If you're boating in a new area, use things like Navionics, ask the locals for advice, and when you don't know, find out. Some great resources are chart number 1. I will leave a link for it in the description below, as well as Weems and Plath makes a quick guide that's really nice to have out of the water so that when you come across those unknown markers, you can identify them quickly and hopefully make good plans. If you've enjoyed this, please feel free to click on the link below and check out some of our summer classes. We've got virtual classes as well, so you can continue to join us online. In the winter, we offer courses in the British Virgin Islands, so we'd love to have you come down there and join us. Or if you're in the Chicagoland area or nearby, please feel free to shoot me an email and ask about private lessons. Thanks so much for joining me today. Again, I'm Captain Scott Souders with Chicago Yacht Academy. Have a great time out on the water.